So, Denise, when most people think about federal data, there are probably only a handful of numbers that come to mind. The jobs and employment numbers from the Bureau of Labor Statistics, for instance, the Census Bureau, maybe the weather. But there is a whole lot more to federal data than that. And I came across your post for the Federation of American Scientists. You said there are more than 300,000 federal data sets, which is just an astonishing number. So, can you give us a sense of the categories of data the government collects and the broad goals of all that data collection, just as a starting point?
Absolutely. And you are right. The federal data ecosystem is vast and it's so much larger than what we typically think of with jobs and weather data. I'll start with one of my favorite data sets that's really surprising, and that is the US Geological Survey's North American Bat Monitoring Database. And what's important about bats and why we need to monitor them is they provide billions of dollars of free services to America's farmers every year. And if you want to continue that free service, you need to protect the bats. And if you want to protect the bats, you need to know where they are. And so that's what this geospatial data set does is it identifies the location and numbers of bats around America. That also makes it easier when development is happening. For example, a highway bridge or a mine or a wind farm for to make sure that that development is mitigating any harm against these bats. The developers need to know where the bats are. So rather than counting the bats themselves, they can go to this federal data set. And then lastly, there's some research that suggests that in places where bats do disappear, rural areas, farming areas, that infant mortality goes up because farmers have to use more pesticides. That's the working theory. So that just really ups the stakes for why these data are so essential for protecting bats and where they are. And that's just one of hundreds of thousands of data sets across the federal ecosystem that at first glance might seem not important, but actually has really substantial consequences for American lives and livelihoods.
So, I want to talk a little bit more broadly about the current administration's approach to data and data preservation and collection. They're certainly well aware of the power of data, which is why they are systematically suppressing it. You mentioned the survey of household food insecurity that's no longer happening. And it's happening just as there are going to be large, major cuts to the SNAP program still to come that were included in the Big Beautiful Bill. The administration has also challenged the accuracy of data. Most recently, they fired a commissioner of the Bureau of Labor Statistics over numbers they just didn't like. How would you characterize how the administration is tackling the question of data, and what do you find most problematic about their approach?
Yeah, there's three main buckets of damages that we're seeing to the federal data ecosystem. And the first was very high profile at the beginning of the administration when many data sets were taken down at the end of January in order to be scrubbed of elements that did not align with administration priorities. So this was gender, DEI, and climate. And for the most part, those data sets went back up. There were a few data elements that did not. For example, the Bureau of Prisons had a data set on inmate statistics, and they removed the transgender category from the gender of inmates. And another example is the National Crime Victimization Survey. There were three questions there that were removed on gender. Similarly, the Office of Personnel Management, OPM, they have a really important data set called FedScope that gives us a sense for the
Hmm.
characteristics of the federal workforce, which are very policy relevant given the major shifts that we've seen in the federal workforce over the last few months. And they deleted all of the race and ethnicity data going back years from
Wow.
so that was really the first and highest profile removal of data that we saw. But most of the data came back after the initial pull down. And then what we've seen, which is more damaging and more like a death by a thousand cuts, is the diminishment of the capacity of federal agencies to collect, protect, and publish data. And that's due to the cuts in staffing, the cancellations of contracts, the terminations of the federal advisory committees that are so essential
Hmm.
for helping data collections keep up with changes in modern society. And we're also seeing that it's just harder to get things done in government. For example, if the Department of Commerce, if the secretary has to personally approve every contract above $100,000, it's just going to be so much harder to get work done, and there's fewer people to do the work. And that will manifest across so many different types of collections. For example, the ground-based radar that protects rural America from tornadoes, somebody's got to fix that equipment if it starts malfunctioning. And if the staff or the contractors who do that work are no longer around, those sensors will start to decay over time. So the quality of the tornado forecasting will go down. It's hard to even fathom the the small bits of damage that are happening that will have such a large collective impact on the quality of the information that we need to just run a modern society.
Yeah.
And then the third trend that we're seeing, and that is started this summer really in earnest, and that is the attacks on data that might reveal that administration policies are not working as promised. The first data set that I noticed was the Social Security Administration's call center wait times data set.
Mm.
That was terminated right around the time when thousands of Social Security Administration employees were let go and the field offices were closing. And at the same time, increased fraud protection measures were going in place. So it would be likely that more Social Security recipients would be needing to call the call center to sort of resolve any issues. And so that data set disappeared right around that time. And then as you noted already, that when the jobs numbers came out this summer that did not align with the administration's message, the BLS commissioner was fired. And then more recently, of course, that food security supplement being terminated right as millions of Americans were about to lose their food stamp benefits. So I expect to see more of those types of losses moving forward when the data are just sort of politically inconvenient.
Yeah. And what about data integrity? You've mentioned the loss of a lot of federal workers in the last 9 months and completeness of federal data. What about accuracy, particularly in light of political pressure? We already know about the political pressure on BLS, but there's going to be pressure on other agencies as well. I'm sure it's happening all the time too. Are Americans going to be able to trust the data they get from their government for the next few years?
So far, we have not seen any direct manipulation of numbers. There's one Lancet article that does an excellent job of cataloging changes to column headers in some data sets, a lot of health data sets in particular, where the survey might have collected gender of a person and that column header was changed to sex. And then that change was not included in the documentation about that data set.
Hmm.
And so that's the closest thing to manipulation that we've seen so far.
So far.
However, it's worth thinking about the life cycle of data. And you have primary data sets that really only the federal government can produce. And then there are derivative works. So, sort of the way that agencies might be interpreting that primary data that they've produced. And we are seeing, for example, with the Department of Energy's recent report on the impact of greenhouse gas emissions or the new recommendations for children and vaccines, we've seen some interpretations of the data that are not as scientific as we would normally expect from the federal government.